What happens when the galaxy's most advanced civilizations fail, but a 12-year-old human boy with nothing but discarded junk succeeds? When the Zephyrian Council's greatest scientists couldn't solve a planetary crisis that threatened to wipe out an entire species, they never imagined salvation would come from the one thing they considered worthless: human creativity born from desperation. This is the story of how Earth's greatest export isn't technology, wisdom, or weapons. It's the uniquely human ability to see possibility where others see only trash, to find hope in the darkest moments, and to turn the impossible into inevitable. Because sometimes, the most sophisticated problems require the most beautifully simple solutions. Prepare yourself for a tale where a child's imagination becomes the key to saving an entire world, and where humanity's greatest strength isn't what we build, but how we rebuild from what others throw away. The crimson sky of Zephyr Prime stretched endlessly above the dying village of Kethmora, its once brilliant blue atmosphere now tainted with the sickly red glow of their failing star. Elder Vexani stood at the edge of the settlement, her forearms crossed in a gesture of deep contemplation, watching as another of their precious water purifiers sputtered and died. The crystalline device, which had served their people for 3 generations, cracked with a sound like breaking glass, its inner light fading to darkness. "That's the 7th one this cycle," whispered Tormel, her youngest advisor, his translucent skin flickering with patterns of distress. "At this rate, we'll lose them all before the next moonrise." Vexani's primary eyes remained fixed on the horizon while her secondary pair studied the broken purifier. The Zephyrians had evolved perfect symmetry over millions of years, their bodies adapted to process the pure energy that once flowed abundantly from their world's core. But, now, as their planet slowly died, that same perfection had become their curse. They were too specialized, too dependent on the ancient technologies that were failing one by one. The village of Kethmora had once housed nearly 10,000 Zephyrians. Now, barely 300 remained, clustered around the last functioning energy wells in the valley. Their homes, carved from living crystal that grew with the planet's natural rhythms, had begun to darken and crumble. The younger Zephyrians could no longer achieve full energy synthesis, their bodies rejecting the contaminated power that seeped from their world's corrupted core. "The council ships will arrive soon," Tormel continued, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken fears. "Perhaps they'll have answers." Vexani's skin rippled with doubt patterns. She had lived through 4 previous council interventions, each promising salvation, each ultimately failing. The Zephyrian Council commanded technology that could terraform dead worlds and harness the power of stars, yet they had been unable to solve the crisis that threatened to destroy her people. How could they succeed now when everything else had failed? The sound of approaching engines drew their attention skyward. 3 massive vessels descended through the poison atmosphere, their hulls gleaming with the advanced metallurgy that had made the Zephyrian Empire one of the galaxy's greatest powers. The ships settled onto the village's landing platform with barely a whisper, their gravity dampeners creating perfect touchdown conditions despite the planet's increasing instability. From the lead vessel emerged a figure that commanded immediate respect. Council Prime Zarthex was ancient even by Zephyrian standards, his body bearing the crystalline scarring that came from direct exposure to pure stellar energy. Behind him walked a procession of the Council's finest minds, engineers who had built artificial suns, biologists who had created entire ecosystems, and theorists whose equations had unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel. Elder Vexani, Zarthex's voice resonated with harmonics that spoke of deep sadness. "We come bearing the conclusions of our most extensive study yet." The elder gestured for the council delegation to join her in the village's central chamber, a vast crystalline dome that had once pulsed with vibrant energy. Now it barely glowed, its faceted walls reflecting their faces in dim, fragmented images. The remaining villagers gathered in respectful silence as the Council Prime activated a holographic display that showed Zephyr Prime in all its dying glory. "The contamination has reached the planetary core," Zarthex began, his secondary arms manipulating the display to show cross-sections of their world's interior. "The quantum instabilities that began in the outer energy shells have cascaded into a complete systemic failure. Our planet is not just dying, it's becoming fundamentally incompatible with Zephyrian biology." Murmurs of distress rippled through the assembled villagers. They had known their situation was dire, but hearing it confirmed by the Council's greatest minds made it terrifyingly real. However, the Council Prime continued, "We have identified several potential solutions. The hologram shifted to show massive orbital platforms and artificial habitat rings. We can relocate your population to manufactured environments that replicate Zephyr Prime's original energy signature. Alternatively, we can attempt to extract and purify the remaining core energy, though this would require evacuating the planet entirely during the process. Vexani studied the proposed solutions with growing unease. Both options would destroy the very essence of what made Kethmore a home. Their village had existed for millennia, its roots literally grown into the planet's crystal matrix. To leave would mean abandoning not just their homes, but their connection to the ancestral energy that defined their species. There must be another way, she said quietly. Our people have adapted to this world for countless generations. We are part of its living system. Surely there's a solution that doesn't require us to abandon everything we are. The council's chief engineer, a being whose body had been augmented with quantum processors, stepped forward. Elder, we have run 17,000 simulations using our most advanced computational matrices. Every scenario that maintains your connection to the planet results in complete population loss within 2 standard cycles. The physics are immutable. As the council delegation continued their presentation, detailing evacuation timelines and habitat specifications, a small disturbance occurred near the chamber's entrance. A young voice, speaking in heavily accented Zephyrian, called out with innocent urgency. "Excuse me. Sorry, excuse me." All eyes turned to see a sight that shocked the assembled Zephyrians into silence. A small human child, no more than 12 Earth years old, pushed through the crowd with the determined energy that only children possess. His brown hair was tousled from what appeared to be outdoor play, his clothing simple and clearly well worn. Most surprisingly, he carried what could only be described as a collection of mechanical refuse, twisted metal parts, broken electronic components, and what appeared to be the remains of a dismantled communications device. Jamie Morrison, Elder Vexani said with evident fondness, "What brings you here during such an important gathering?" The boy, apparently named Jamie, bounced on his toes as he approached the center of the chamber. "I heard about the water purifiers breaking, and I thought maybe I could help. I've been working on something really cool, and I think it might work here too." The Council Prime's expression shifted through several phases of confusion and mild irritation. "Child, this is a matter of planetary engineering beyond your comprehension. Perhaps you should return to your guardians." But Jamie was already unpacking his collection of salvaged components, laying them out on the chamber floor with the systematic precision of someone far older than his years. "See, the thing is, I've been living here for almost 2 years now, ever since Mom and Dad started studying the energy crystals. And I noticed something really interesting about how the purifiers work when they're broken versus when they're functioning." Tormel leaned closer to Elder Vexani. "Should we remove the human child? The council's time is quite valuable." The elder held up a restraining hand. She had watched Jamie Morrison grow and learn during his family's extended research mission, and she had developed a deep appreciation for the boy's unique perspective. Humans, she had discovered, approached problems with a chaotic creativity that often bypassed conventional wisdom entirely. "Please continue, Jamie," she said, ignoring the surprised ripples of color that flowed across the council delegation's skin. The boy grinned and picked up what appeared to be a burned-out energy coupling from one of the failed purifiers. "This is the problem, right here. You guys build these amazing machines that work perfectly when everything is perfect. But, when the energy gets contaminated, they can't adapt. They're too pure, too precise." He began connecting various components with crude but functional interfaces, his small hands moving with surprising dexterity. "But, look at this old radio transmitter I found in the human research station's garbage. It's designed to work with dirty signals, interference, all kinds of problems. What if we could make the purifiers more like this radio, still functional, but able to handle imperfection?" The council's chief engineer scoffed audibly. "Child, our purification technology operates on quantum-level energy manipulation. Your primitive electronic devices cannot possibly interface with our systems." Jamie looked up with the infinite patience that children reserve for adults who don't understand obvious things. "Maybe not directly, but what about the principles? You're trying to make perfect energy from imperfect sources, right?" But what if instead of making the energy perfect, you make the village able to work with imperfect energy? The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the dying crystal walls. Jamie continued working with his salvaged components, apparently building something that resembled a hybrid between Zephyrian energy technology and human electronic engineering. The combination should have been impossible, the two technological approaches were fundamentally incompatible. Yet as the boy made his final connections, something unexpected happened. The device began to emit a soft, steady glow that seemed to resonate with the chamber's failing crystal structure. The walls brightened perceptibly, their ancient patterns beginning to pulse with renewed vitality. "By the core," breathed Tormel, "it's actually interfacing with our systems." Council Prime Zarthex approached the crude device with growing amazement. His instruments registered energy patterns that shouldn't exist, a stable hybrid frequency that somehow translated between human electromagnetic principles and Zephyrian quantum harmonics. The boy had created a bridge between two completely different approaches to manipulating energy. "How is this possible?" the Council Prime whispered. Jamie beamed with pride. "Humans call it making do. When something doesn't work the way it's supposed to, we figure out how to make it work anyway. We're really good at fixing things with whatever we have available." Elder Vexani felt something stir in her consciousness that she hadn't experienced in cycles: hope. Not the desperate hope of the drowning, but the confident hope of those who see a genuine path forward. This human child hadn't solved their crisis yet, but he had demonstrated something that all of the Council's advanced science had missed. Sometimes the solution to impossible problems lay not in perfection, but in the beautiful imperfection of adaptation. "Jamie Morrison," she said formally, "would you be willing to teach us more about these human principles of making do?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. And I have tons more ideas. Want to see what I can build with the rest of this junk?" As Jamie began to outline his chaotic but brilliant concepts for adaptive technology, the assembled Zephyrians realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The galaxy's most sophisticated civilization was about to learn survival techniques from a 12-year-old human who saw possibility where they saw only failure. The dying light of Zephyr Prime still painted the sky crimson, but, in the crystalline chamber of Kethmora village, a different kind of light was beginning to grow, the light of human ingenuity applied to impossible problems, promising solutions that no one had dared to imagine. The next morning brought a sight that would have been unthinkable just one day earlier: Council Prime Zarthex, supreme leader of one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, sitting cross-legged on the ground next to a human child, carefully sorting through a pile of what could generously be called technological refuse. "This piece here," Jamie said, holding up a corroded circuit board that any Zephyrian engineer would have immediately discarded, "still has 3 working pathways. They're not perfect, but they can carry about 60% of their original load. In human engineering, we call that good enough to get the job done." Zarthex examined the damaged component with instruments that could analyze matter at the subatomic level. His readings confirmed the boy's assessment, but also revealed something troubling. The inefficiency would compound exponentially in any complex system. Zephyrian technology requires precise tolerances. "That's the problem right there," Jamie replied with the confident air of someone who had discovered an obvious truth. "You guys are thinking like perfectionists, but your planet isn't perfect anymore. You need to think like survivors." The human boy had spent the night in the village's guest quarters, and word of his demonstration had spread through the settlement like wildfire. Elder Vexani had declared a temporary suspension of evacuation preparations, much to the council delegation's obvious discomfort. Now, as the crimson dawnlight filtered through the crystal dome, nearly the entire population had gathered to witness this unprecedented exchange. "Show them the backup radio," suggested Dr. Elena Morrison, Jamie's mother, who had arrived with the sunrise to check on her son. The xenoarchaeologist had been studying Zephyrian energy matrices for 2 years, and she understood better than most how radical her son's approach actually was. Jamie nodded eagerly and pulled out a battered communication device that looked like it had survived several explosions. "This belonged to my grandfather. He used it during something called the resource wars on Earth, way before we had all the fancy quantum communicators. Look at this, half the components are fried, the antenna is held on with metal tape, and the power coupling is definitely not designed for this model. He activated the device, which immediately filled the air with crackling static before resolving into a clear human voice-speaking Earth standard. The transmission was coming from the orbital research station where Jamie's father was analyzing mineral samples. By the core, whispered Tormel, it actually functions despite massive component failure. That's exactly the point, Jamie said, carefully disassembling the radio to show its internal modifications. Humans are really bad at building perfect things, so we got really good at making broken things work. We call it jury-rigging or field expedient solutions. The important part isn't that everything works perfectly, it's that the whole system keeps functioning even when individual parts fail. The Council's chief biologist, a being whose understanding of living systems spanned thousands of worlds, leaned forward with growing interest. You're describing biological principles. Redundancy, adaptation, survival through imperfection. But, applied to technology. Exactly. Jamie's enthusiasm was infectious. Humans learned engineering from nature because we're not smart enough to do it any other way. We make messy, adaptable systems because that's what works when everything goes wrong. Council Prime Zarthex was beginning to understand the profound implications of what the boy was suggesting. Zephyrian civilization had achieved greatness through the pursuit of technological perfection, but that same perfection had made them vulnerable to systemic failure. They had built beautiful, flawless systems that could not adapt when their fundamental assumptions were challenged. Demonstrate how this principle might apply to our energy purification crisis, he commanded, his tone carrying both authority and genuine curiosity. Jamie immediately began sorting through his collection of salvaged components, pulling out items that made the assembled Zephyrians recoil with instinctive revulsion. Burnt circuits, corroded metal fragments, power cells that read as completely discharged, all the detritus of failed technology that their culture taught them to dispose of immediately. First, we need to stop thinking about making pure energy, Jamie explained as he began connecting components with an approach that seemed chaotic but somehow purposeful. Instead, we think about making useful energy. Pure energy is perfect, but useful energy gets the job done. He pulled out what appeared to be a failed Zephyrian energy coupling, its crystalline matrix clouded with contamination that rendered it useless by their standards. You guys threw this away because it can only process about 40% of its designed capacity. But, what if 40% is enough? The boy began integrating the failed coupling with human electronic components in a configuration that violated every principle of proper engineering. He used metal wire where crystal conduits should go, electronic resistors to regulate flows that should have been controlled by quantum fields, and analog gauges to monitor systems that required digital precision. This should not function, stated the Council's chief engineer with absolute certainty. The technological paradigms are fundamentally incompatible. Should not, but does, Jamie replied cheerfully, activating his hybrid creation. The device immediately began producing energy output that registered on Zephyrian instruments, though the readings were unlike anything they had ever seen. Instead of the clean, stable wavelengths their technology produced, Jamie's hybrid system generated choppy, inconsistent power that fluctuated wildly but maintained an overall upward trend. It's ugly, Tormel said with obvious distaste. The harmonics are all wrong, the phase relationships are chaotic. But it works, Elder Vexani observed quietly. And it works using contaminated core energy that our systems reject entirely. Jamie nodded enthusiastically. That's the beauty of it. Your energy is too dirty for your perfect machines, but it's way too good for our simple machines. We just need to build machines that are somewhere in between good enough to be useful, but simple enough to handle imperfection. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrians had been focused on restoring their technology to perfect function, but Jamie was suggesting they abandon perfection entirely in favor of adaptation. It was a philosophical revolution disguised as an engineering problem. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, her expression showing the pride of a mother and the excitement of a scientist. Jamie's been experimenting with hybrid systems since we arrived. He's created interfaces between our survey equipment and your crystal matrices that shouldn't be possible according to either technology base. Show them the greenhouse, Jamie suggested, bouncing with excitement. The group followed the boy to what had once been a Zephyrian agricultural dome, now dark and lifeless due to energy system failures. Jamie led them inside and activated a series of crude devices he had apparently installed without anyone's knowledge. Suddenly, the dome filled with light, not the pure, harmonious glow of traditional Zephyrian illumination, but a harsh, flickering radiance that seemed to pulse with chaotic energy. Plants that had been withering in the contaminated environment began to respond immediately, their crystalline leaves brightening as they absorbed the imperfect but usable energy. The plants don't care if the energy is perfect, Jamie explained. They just need enough of the right kind of power to survive. So I built lights that can use the bad energy and convert it into something good enough for growing food. The council delegation stared in amazement as they witnessed impossible flora thriving under conditions that should have killed them instantly. The hybrid lighting system was an abomination by Zephyrian standards, inefficient, unstable, and aesthetically offensive, but it was keeping their agricultural systems alive when all their advanced technology had failed. This is remarkable, Council Prime Zarthax admitted, his skin patterns shifting to show deep contemplation. But surely this approach has limitations. How do you maintain complex systems when everything is built from salvaged components? Jamie grinned and pulled out what appeared to be a technical manual written in crayon. That's what instruction manuals are for. Humans write down everything because we know stuff breaks and we'll need to fix it later. We also train lots of people to fix the same things, because we can't rely on having experts available all the time. The manual, childishly illustrated but surprisingly detailed, showed step-by-step procedures for repairing and maintaining Jamie's hybrid systems using whatever materials might be available. More importantly, it was written in simple language that could be understood by anyone, not just specialized engineers. Decentralized knowledge, Dr. Morrison explained. Human survival has always depended on ordinary people being able to solve extraordinary problems with limited resources. We can't afford to rely on perfect conditions or specialized expertise. The gathered Zephyrians were beginning to understand that they were witnessing more than just clever engineering, they were seeing an entirely different philosophy of technological survival. Where their culture prized perfection, elegance, and specialized knowledge, humans had developed systems based on adaptability, redundancy, and distributed competence. There's something else, Jamie added, his expression growing serious for the first time. The really important part isn't just making things work, it's making sure everyone knows how to fix them when they break again. Because they will break. Everything breaks eventually. He gestured toward the thriving plants in the agricultural dome. I can teach everyone in the village how to maintain these systems, how to rebuild them when they fail, and how to improve them using whatever materials you can find. That way, you don't need the council or perfect components or anything else. You just need people who know how to solve problems. Elder Vexani felt a profound shift in her understanding of the crisis facing her people. They had been thinking of their dying planet as a technological problem requiring technological solutions. But Jamie was showing them that it was really a survival problem requiring survival skills that humans had developed through millennia of making do with whatever was available. Young Jamie Morrison, she said formally, would you be willing to teach our people these human methods of creative adaptation? The boy nodded eagerly. Absolutely. But I should warn you, learning to think like a human means learning to be comfortable with imperfection. Everything we build looks messy and sounds wrong and barely works most of the time. But it keeps working even when everything goes wrong. Council Prime Zarthax studied the thriving agricultural dome with new eyes, seeing not an elegant solution but a robust one. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time for the Zephyrian people to learn a new kind of engineering. One based not on perfection, but on persistence. As the crimson sky of their dying world stretched overhead, the assembled Zephyrians began to consider an unprecedented possibility, that their salvation might not come from restoring their lost perfection, but from learning to thrive with beautiful imperfection. And their teacher would be a 12-year-old human boy who saw opportunity in every piece of broken technology. The lesson had begun, and it would change everything they thought they knew about survival. 3 weeks after Jamie Morrison had first demonstrated his hybrid technology, the village of Kethmora was barely recognizable. What had once been a settlement defined by crystalline perfection now resembled something that might have emerged from a human frontier colony, functional, adaptable, and undeniably alive despite its obvious imperfections. Elder Vexani walked through the transformed settlement with a sense of wonder that had grown daily since the human boy had begun his teachings. Everywhere she looked, Zephyrians were engaged in activities that would have been unthinkable mere days ago, dismantling failed equipment to salvage useful components, connecting incompatible technologies with improvised interfaces, and, most remarkably, documenting their discoveries in simple, hand-drawn manuals that anyone could understand. The council ships are requesting another status update, Tormel informed her, his skin pattern showing a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Council Prime Zarthex wants to know when we'll be ready for the evacuation protocols. The elder paused beside what had once been the village's central energy distribution hub. The original Zephyrian systems had failed weeks ago, their perfect crystalline matrices unable to process the contaminated core energy. Now, the facility hummed with the distinctive sound of Jamie's hybrid technology, a rough, irregular pulse that somehow managed to keep the lights on and the water flowing. "Tell the Council Prime that we have alternative solutions under development," she replied carefully. "And ask him to extend our deadline by one full cycle." Tormel's pattern shifted to show shock. "Elder, the Council has already committed significant resources to our evacuation. They're expecting us to be ready for transport within days." "Then, they will be disappointed," Vexani said with a firmness that surprised them both. "Our young human friend has shown us possibilities that the Council's experts never considered. We owe it to ourselves and our children to explore these possibilities fully before abandoning our home." As if summoned by their conversation, Jamie Morrison appeared around the corner of a crystal dwelling, his arms full of electronic components and his face bright with enthusiasm. Behind him followed a group of young Zephyrians who had become his most eager students, their traditional robes modified with tool belts and component pouches that would have horrified their elders just weeks ago. "Elder Vexani," Jamie called out cheerfully. "You have to see what Kirilis figured out about the water recycling systems." The young Zephyrian in question stepped forward shyly, her skin flickering with patterns of pride mixed with uncertainty. In her forearms, she carried what appeared to be a completely rebuilt water purifier that bore only a passing resemblance to the elegant devices their people had used for generations. I followed the human principles," Kirilis said hesitantly. "Instead of trying to make perfect water, I built a system that makes good enough water using the contaminated input we actually have." Jamie nodded approvingly. "Show her the redundancy features." Kirilis activated her creation, and immediately several things went wrong. Warning indicators flashed, efficiency readings dropped below optimal levels, and the harmonic resonance was completely off by Zephyrian standards. Yet clean water continued to flow from the output nozzle at a steady rate, and the system adapted to each new problem with automatic adjustments that kept the overall function stable. "It's not perfect," Kirilis explained, "but it works with anything we put into it. Even when individual components fail, the system keeps running because I built in what Jamie calls graceful degradation." Elder Vexani studied the device with growing amazement. The young engineer had internalized the human approach to problem solving with remarkable speed, creating something that was simultaneously crude and brilliant. More importantly, she had documented every step of the process in a detailed manual that could be reproduced by anyone in the village. "This is extraordinary work," the elder said formally. "Have you shared these innovations with the rest of the engineering council?" "That's the best part," Jamie interjected. "Everyone's been working on different systems, and they're all starting to connect together. Want to see the really cool stuff?" The boy led them toward what had once been the village's primary energy collection facility. The original structure had been built around a massive crystal matrix designed to channel pure planetary energy with perfect efficiency. Now, the building housed something that looked like organized chaos, dozens of hybrid devices connected by an intricate network of improvised cables, jury-rigged interfaces, and diagnostic equipment that combined Zephyrian precision with human adaptability. "We call it the adaptive grid," explained Yuntar, one of the village's senior engineers who had initially been skeptical of Jamie's methods. "Instead of one perfect system that fails catastrophically, we have dozens of imperfect systems that support each other." The engineer gestured toward a control panel that would have given traditional Zephyrian designers fits of aesthetic horror. Mismatched gauges, handwritten labels, and warning lights in 3 different colors created a display that was functional but decidedly inelegant. Each subsystem can operate independently, Yuntar continued, his skin patterns showing growing excitement as he explained their innovations. When one component fails, the others automatically compensate. When contaminated energy spikes beyond tolerance levels, the system redistributes the load rather than shutting down entirely. Jamie bounced on his toes with pride. And the really awesome part is that everyone in the village knows how to fix at least part of it. We've been teaching human-style maintenance workshops where everybody learns everything. Elder Vexani observed a group of Zephyrians ranging from youngsters to elders gathered around a training station where they were learning to repair power couplings using nothing but salvaged components and basic hand tools. The site was revolutionary in traditional Zephyrian society. Such complex technical work was reserved for specially trained engineers with access to perfect materials. "How are you handling quality control?" she asked, knowing that this had been one of the major concerns raised by the council's experts. "That's where it gets really interesting," Jamie replied, leading her to another station where Kirilis was teaching a class on diagnostic procedures. "Instead of trying to prevent failures, we're teaching everyone how to detect and fix them quickly." The young engineer was demonstrating how to identify failing components using nothing more than visual inspection and simple measurement tools. Her students practiced the techniques on deliberately damaged equipment, learning to spot problems before they became critical failures. "The human approach assumes that everything will break eventually," Kirilis explained to her attentive audience. "So instead of building things that never break, we build things that are easy to fix when they do break." Dr. Elena Morrison appeared at Elder Vexani's side, her expression showing the mixture of pride and amazement that had become common among the human research team. "They're learning faster than we expected," she said quietly. "Jamie's techniques are spreading through the village like a beneficial infection." "Is this approach sustainable long-term?" the elder asked. "Can hybrid systems like these support a permanent settlement?" Dr. Morrison gestured toward a data display that showed energy production and consumption patterns over the past 3 weeks. "The numbers are remarkable. They're not just surviving, they're actually more efficient than before the crisis began. The redundancy and adaptability more than compensate for the individual system inefficiencies." The implications were staggering. The Zephyrians were not just learning to cope with their dying planet, they were learning to thrive in conditions that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. More importantly, they were developing skills and knowledge that would make them resilient against future crises. "There's something else you should see," Jamie said, tugging on the elder's arm with the insistence that only children could manage. "The communication array is working again." He led them to what had been the village's primary interstellar communication facility. The original Zephyrian equipment had been among the first casualties of the energy contamination, cutting Kethmora off from the broader galactic community. Now, a bewildering array of hybrid technology filled the chamber, connecting salvaged Zephyrian quantum communicators with human radio equipment in ways that should have been physically impossible. "We can't reach the distant galaxy clusters like before," explained Mordan, the village's communication specialist, "but we're in contact with 17 other settlements across Zephyr Prime. They're all asking how we're surviving when everyone else is still failing." Elder Vexani stared at the communications display showing incoming messages from settlements she had assumed were already dead or evacuated. Village after village was reporting that they had heard about Kethmora's innovations and wanted to learn the human techniques for themselves. "They want to know if we can teach them," Mordan continued. "Some are offering to trade resources for training. Others are asking if they can send their young engineers to study with us." The elder felt a profound shift in her understanding of their situation. They had started this journey facing extinction, planning for evacuation and the abandonment of everything they had built over centuries. Now, they were potentially looking at the foundation of a new kind of Zephyrian civilization, one built not on perfection, but on adaptation. "Jamie Morrison," she said formally, "your people have given us something more valuable than advanced technology or perfect solutions. You've given us hope based on our own capabilities." The boy grinned with typical human enthusiasm. "That's what humans do best. We're really good at being stubborn and not giving up even when everything looks impossible." As if to demonstrate his point, alarms began sounding throughout the facility, not the pure, harmonic tones of traditional Zephyrian warnings, but the harsh, urgent sounds of human alert systems. Instead of panic, however, the response was immediate and coordinated. Teams of Zephyrians moved with practiced efficiency to diagnose and address whatever problem had triggered the alarm. Primary energy coupling in Section 7 is fluctuating, reported one of the technicians. Switching to backup configuration and dispatching repair team.
Understood, Yuntar replied calmly. Estimated repair time?
40 minutes using standard procedures, or we can implement a temporary bypass that'll hold until we manufacture replacement components.
Elder Vexani watched the crisis response with growing amazement.
Just weeks ago, such a failure would have meant the loss of an entire facility and the displacement of dozens of families. Now, it was simply another problem to be solved with creativity and determination.
This is what resilience looks like, Dr. Morrison observed.
Not the absence of problems, but the ability to solve them quickly and move forward. As the repair teams went about their work with the casual competence that had become commonplace in the transformed village, Elder Vexani made a decision that would echo through Zephyrian history. It was time to contact Council Prime Zarthex and inform him that Kethmora would not be evacuating after all. Instead, they would be building something entirely new, a Zephyrian civilization that could not only survive crisis, but learn and grow stronger from every challenge it faced. And, at the heart of this transformation was a 12-year-old human boy who had taught an entire alien species that sometimes the best solutions came not from perfect technology, but from perfectly imperfect human creativity. Council Prime Zarthex stood in the observation deck of his flagship, staring down at Zephyr Prime with an expression that would have been unreadable to humans but conveyed profound confusion to any Zephyrian observer.
Below him, the planet that had been declared dying just weeks ago now showed signs of activity that defied every scientific model his people possessed.
"Explain this to me again," he said to his chief analyst, whose skin patterns were flickering with patterns that indicated extreme bewilderment. "Sir, we're detecting energy signatures from 47 settlements that were previously classified as abandoned or extinct.
They're not just surviving, they're expanding. And they're all using technology that doesn't match anything in our databases."
The Council Prime activated a holographic display that showed a real-time map of Zephyr Prime. Where there had once been dark zones marking dead settlements, now there were pulsing lights indicating active civilizations. More confusing still, these settlements were communicating with each other using transmission methods that combined Zephyrian quantum communications with what could only be described as primitive electromagnetic broadcasting.
"Have we established contact with Kethmora?" Zarthex asked.
"Yes, sir. Elder Vexani has requested that you visit personally to observe what she calls the new paradigm. She also mentioned something about a human child who has been teaching them survival engineering."
The Council Prime felt a deep unease settling over him. He had left Kethmora expecting to return to evacuate a dying settlement.
Instead, he was being invited to observe innovations that apparently contradicted everything his civilization knew about proper technology. It was either the most remarkable discovery in Zephyrian history or evidence that the planetary contamination was affecting cognitive function.
"Prepare a shuttle," he commanded.
"And bring a full analytical team.
I want to understand exactly what's happening down there."
2 hours later, Zarthex found himself standing once again in the crystalline chamber of Kethmora, but the space had been transformed beyond recognition. Where there had once been elegant crystal formations pulsing with pure energy, there was now a chaotic maze of improvised technology that somehow managed to be both aesthetically offensive and undeniably functional.
"Council Prime!" Jamie Morrison called out cheerfully, apparently unaware that interrupting the supreme leader of Zephyrian civilization was considered inappropriate. "You have to see what we've built."
The human boy was surrounded by a mixed group of Zephyrian engineers and children, all of whom were covered in what appeared to be lubricating fluids and showing signs of extensive manual labor. Behind them, a massive display screen showed real-time data from settlements across the planet. "Young human," Zarthex said with careful formality, "I understand you have been teaching our people alternative approaches to engineering."
"Oh, way more than that," Jamie replied enthusiastically. "We've been teaching them how to think like humans. Want to see the really cool stuff?"
Before the Council Prime could respond, Jamie was leading him toward a series of workstations where Zephyrians were engaged in activities that would have horrified their ancestors. They were disassembling perfectly functional equipment to understand how it worked, deliberately breaking components to test failure modes, and, most shocking of all, building new devices from what could only be described as technological refuse. "This is Yuntar," Jamie said, introducing the senior engineer who was training a group of young Zephyrians in what humans apparently called troubleshooting.
"He's gotten really good at thinking like a human engineer."
Yuntar looked up from a device that appeared to have been assembled from the remains of at least 3 different machines. "Council Prime, I must report that the human approach to technology has exceeded all expectations.
We are not merely surviving the energy crisis, we are thriving despite it."
The engineer activated his improvised creation, which immediately began producing clean energy from contaminated core feeds at efficiency levels that should have been impossible. More remarkably, when Yuntar deliberately induced several component failures, the system automatically adapted its configuration to maintain functionality.
"The key insight," Yuntar explained, "is that humans design for failure rather than success. They assume everything will break, so they build systems that continue functioning even when individual components fail catastrophically."
Council Prime Zarthex studied the readings from the hybrid device with instruments that represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian scientific achievement. The energy patterns were unlike anything in their databases, chaotic, inefficient by traditional standards, yet somehow stable and productive.
"This contradicts fundamental principles of energy engineering," he said finally. "That's exactly what makes it work." Jamie interjected with typical human enthusiasm.
"Your fundamental principles assume everything stays perfect forever. But nothing stays perfect, so you need engineering principles that work when stuff goes wrong."
Elder Vexani approached the group with an expression that conveyed deep satisfaction mixed with anticipation. "Council Prime, there is much more you need to see.
We have been in communication with settlements across the planet, and the results have exceeded our most optimistic projections." She gestured toward the communication station where Mordan was coordinating with what appeared to be dozens of other settlements. The display showed a constantly updating map of Zephyr Prime with new communities coming online every few hours. "They're calling it the Survival Network," Mordan explained. "Settlements that had been completely cut off for cycles are now sharing resources, knowledge, and technical support.
And it's all based on the human philosophy of adaptive engineering." "Show him the training program," Jamie suggested, bouncing with excitement.
The Council Prime found himself led to what had once been the village's cultural center, now transformed into a bustling educational facility. Zephyrians of all ages were gathered around workstations where they learned to repair, modify, and build technology using nothing but salvaged components and human engineering principles. "We call it universal technical competence," explained Kirilis, who had apparently become one of the primary instructors. "Instead of having specialized engineers who know everything about narrow topics, we're training everyone to know something about everything." She gestured toward a mixed group of adults and children who were working together to rebuild a water purification system using components salvaged from completely unrelated equipment. "The human approach assumes that expertise won't always be available when you need it, so everyone learns basic problem-solving skills." Council Prime Zarthex watched a scene that challenged everything he thought he knew about proper civilization. Young Zephyrians were teaching adults how to identify component failures using simple diagnostic techniques. Engineers were learning manual repair skills that had been obsolete for millennia. Most remarkably, everyone seemed to be enjoying the process of working with imperfect tools to solve impossible problems. "The cultural implications are staggering," Dr. Elena Morrison commented, appearing at his side with her characteristic human directness. "Your people are discovering that they enjoy challenges when they have the tools to overcome them." "But surely this approach has limitations," the Council Prime protested.
"What happens when you encounter problems that require genuine technological sophistication?" Jamie overheard the question and immediately perked up.
"That's the best part.
Want to see our deep core mining project?"
The group followed the boy to an area outside the village where a truly impressive piece of hybrid engineering was under construction. Zephyrian quantum drilling technology had been combined with human industrial techniques to create a mining platform that looked like something from a fever dream but, was apparently functional. The contamination is worst near the surface, Jamie explained as they approached the bizarre contraption. But, the deep core still has clean energy if you can get to it. Your people tried to drill down using perfect technology that couldn't handle the contaminated layers. So we built in perfect technology that can handle anything, Yuntar continued. The drilling system is designed to adapt to changing conditions rather than maintain optimal parameters. The Council Prime studied the mining platform with growing amazement. It was simultaneously crude and sophisticated, combining the most advanced Zephyrian technology with salvaged human equipment in ways that should have been impossible. More importantly, it was working. The platform was successfully extracting clean energy from depths that traditional drilling equipment couldn't reach. How many settlements have implemented similar projects, he asked. 37 as of this morning, Mordan replied from the communication station. And, they're all sharing improvements and modifications through the survival network. Every innovation at one settlement is immediately available to everyone else. Elder Vexani moved to stand beside the Council Prime, her expression showing the quiet confidence of someone who had witnessed impossible things become routine. This is what we wanted you to see, Zarthex. Not just that we can survive our dying planet, but that we can build something better than what we had before. Better? The Council Prime's skin pattern showed skeptical confusion. These systems are inefficient, aesthetically unpleasant, and completely dependent on constant maintenance. But they're also resilient, adaptable, and accessible to ordinary citizens, Elder Vexani replied. For the first time in our civilization's history, every Zephyrian has the knowledge and tools needed to solve complex technical problems. We are no longer dependent on perfect conditions or specialized experts. As if to demonstrate her point, alarms began sounding from the mining platform. Instead of panic, the response was immediate and coordinated. Teams of Zephyrians moved with practiced efficiency to diagnose and address whatever problem had occurred, their movements showing the casual competence of people who expected equipment to fail and were prepared to fix it. Crystalline matrix fracture in drill head number 3, reported one of the technicians. Switching to backup configuration and implementing temporary repair. Understood, Yuntar replied calmly. Estimated downtime? Negligible. We'll have it back online within the hour, and the permanent fix can wait until tonight's maintenance cycle. Council Prime Zarthex watched the crisis response with growing understanding. What he was witnessing wasn't just effective engineering, it was a fundamental transformation of Zephyrian society. These people were no longer the passive recipients of perfect technology provided by distant experts. They had become active participants in their own survival, capable of solving any problem with creativity and determination. Jamie Morrison, he said formally, turning to address the human boy who had catalyzed this remarkable transformation. What you have taught our people, it changes everything we thought we knew about civilization itself. Jamie grinned with typical human enthusiasm. That's what humans do best. We're really good at figuring out new ways to solve old problems. There is one more thing you must see, Elder Vexani said quietly. Something that will help you understand the full scope of what is happening here. She led them back toward the communication center, where Mordan was monitoring transmissions from across the planet. The display screen showed not just the settlements that had adopted human engineering techniques, but also the communities that were still struggling with traditional methods. The contrast is becoming impossible to ignore, Mordan explained. Settlements using adaptive engineering are not just surviving, they're growing, exploring, and innovating. Meanwhile, communities that continue to depend on traditional technology are still failing at an accelerating rate. Council Prime Zarthex studied the data with the kind of analytical precision that had made him supreme leader of his people. The patterns were undeniable. Human engineering principles weren't just helping individual settlements survive, they were creating the foundation for a completely new kind of Zephyrian civilization. How many settlements have requested training in human techniques, he asked. All of them, Elder Vexani replied simply. Even the communities that haven't yet implemented these methods are asking for instruction. They can see the results, and they want to learn. The Council Prime felt the weight of an unprecedented decision settling on his shoulders. He could order the immediate evacuation of all settlements, preserving traditional Zephyrian civilization by transplanting it to artificial habitats. Or he could support this radical transformation, allowing his people to become something entirely new based on human principles of adaptive survival.
What would happen, he asked slowly, if we were to implement these techniques across our entire civilization? Jamie bounced with excitement. You'd become the most awesome alien species in the galaxy. Instead of just building perfect things, you'd build things that get better when they break. The simplicity of the boy's vision was both inspiring and terrifying. Council Prime Zarthex was looking at the potential rebirth of his entire civilization, based on principles taught by a 12-year-old human who saw opportunity in every piece of broken technology. The revolution was no longer limited to a single village. It was spreading across an entire world, and soon it might spread across the stars themselves. 6 months after Jamie Morrison had first demonstrated his hybrid technology to a dying village, Council Prime Zarthex stood in the newly constructed central coordination hub of what was now being called New Zephyr, a planet-wide network of interconnected settlements that bore little resemblance to the dying world they had expected to evacuate. The transformation was visible even from orbit. Where satellite images had once shown dark zones marking failed settlements, now there were bright clusters of activity connected by a web of communication and transportation links that pulsed with constant traffic. The planet's surface, once marked by the elegant crystal spires that had defined traditional Zephyrian architecture, now showed a chaotic but vibrant landscape of adaptive structures that grew and changed according to need rather than aesthetic principle. The final settlement reports are coming in, announced Kirilis, who had become the unofficial coordinator of what everyone now called the Survival Network. Her workstation, like everything else in the new civilization, was a bewildering combination of Zephyrian precision and human adaptability that somehow achieved functionality that exceeded either technology individually. All 437 active settlements have successfully transitioned to adaptive engineering principles, she continued, her skin pattern showing the deep satisfaction that had become common among Zephyrians who had embraced human problem-solving techniques. Energy independence is at 96%, food production exceeds current population requirements, and we've established manufacturing capabilities that can produce essential components from locally available materials. Council Prime Zarthex studied the planetary status displays with an expression that would have conveyed amazement to any observer familiar with Zephyrian emotional patterns. The numbers were not just encouraging, they were revolutionary. A planet that had been declared uninhabitable by the galaxy's finest experts was now supporting a larger population than it had before the crisis began. What about technological innovation, he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Exponential growth, replied Yuntar, who had become one of the leading advocates for human engineering philosophy. When you teach everyone to solve problems instead of just following procedures, you get solutions from unexpected sources. We've documented over 12,000 innovations in the past 4 months, most of them developed by ordinary citizens rather than trained engineers. Jamie Morrison looked up from a workstation where he was training a group of young Zephyrians in what humans called lateral thinking, the ability to solve problems by approaching them from unexpected angles. At 14 Earth years old now, he had grown taller but retained the infectious enthusiasm that had first captured Elder Vexani's attention. The really cool thing, Jamie said with typical human directness, is that your people are getting better at this stuff than humans are. You've got the precision thinking we lack, combined with the adaptive flexibility we taught you. It's like getting the best of both approaches. The boy gestured toward his students, who were working on what appeared to be a completely impossible project, building a faster-than-light communication system using nothing but salvaged components and locally manufactured parts. According to every principle of physics that the Council understood, the project should have been doomed to failure. Yet the device was working, transmitting messages to other star systems using principles that combined Zephyrian quantum manipulation with human engineering redundancy in ways that created entirely new technological possibilities. We're not just surviving anymore, explained Mordan, who had expanded the original communication network into something that connected not just settlements on Zephyr Prime, but Zephyrian colonies throughout the galaxy. We're pioneering completely new approaches to technology that other species are starting to study and adopt. Council Prime Zarthex activated a holographic display that showed communication traffic between Zephyr Prime and the rest of the Zephyrian Empire.
The volume of messages had increased by several orders of magnitude since the implementation of human engineering principles, but, more significantly, the content had fundamentally changed. Where Zephyrian settlements had once reported problems and requested assistance from the central government, they now shared innovations and offered solutions to other communities facing similar challenges.
The entire dynamic of their civilization had shifted from dependence to collaboration.
Show him the off-world reports, Jamie suggested, his excitement evident in the way he bounced on his toes while speaking. Elder Vexani, now serving as the primary liaison between New Zephyr and the broader galactic community, activated another display that showed status updates from Zephyrian colonies on distant worlds.
The transformation is spreading throughout our space. Colonies that were struggling with resource limitations or equipment failures are implementing adaptive engineering techniques with remarkable results.
More importantly, Dr. Elena Morrison added, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a scientist whose theories had been validated by practical success, other species are requesting permission to study your innovations. The Crystalline Collective wants to understand how you've achieved technological resilience. The Quantum Fellowship is interested in your distributed problem-solving networks. Even the machine intelligences are curious about your fusion of precision and adaptability.
The implications were staggering.
What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a single dying village had evolved into technological and philosophical innovations that were attracting attention throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrians had not just survived their planetary crisis, they had emerged as pioneers of a completely new approach to civilization itself. There's something else, Jamie said, his expression growing serious for the first time in the conversation.
Something really important that I think you guys need to consider.
Council Prime Zarthex turned his attention to the human boy who had become, in many ways, the most influential individual in Zephyrian history.
What concerns you, young Morrison?
It's not a concern, exactly, Jamie replied thoughtfully.
It's more like an opportunity.
See, humans are really good at adaptive engineering because we evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. But, you guys are naturally good at precision and optimization. Together, we could probably solve problems that neither species could handle alone. The boy gestured toward a technical manual that had been produced by the joint Human-Zephyrian research team.
What if this wasn't just about saving your planet? What if it was about creating a new kind of civilization that could handle any challenge the galaxy throws at it?
Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly. The principles you've developed here, adaptive resilience, distributed competence, collaborative innovation, these could revolutionize how entire galactic civilizations approach survival and growth.
Elder Vexani felt a profound sense of possibility settling over the assembled group.
They had started this journey facing the extinction of their species. Now they were contemplating the creation of something that might help every species in the galaxy become more resilient, more adaptable, more capable of thriving in an universe that was inherently unpredictable.
What would such a collaboration look like?
Council Prime Zarthex asked. Cultural exchange programs, Jamie replied immediately, his enthusiasm returning. Humans could learn precision engineering from you guys, and we could teach more species about adaptive problem solving. We could create research stations where different species work together on impossible problems. Mobile training fleets, suggested Yuntar, that could visit struggling colonies and teach adaptive engineering techniques tailored to local conditions and species requirements. Galactic innovation networks, added Kyrillus, where discoveries made by one species are immediately available to everyone else, modified and improved through collaborative development. Council Prime Zarthex felt the weight of another unprecedented decision settling on his shoulders, but this time the weight was accompanied by excitement rather than anxiety. The choice before him wasn't between evacuation and survival, it was between survival and transformation into something greater than the Zephyrian people had ever imagined possible. The Council will need to approve such extensive collaboration with other species, he said carefully.
Actually, Elder Vexani said with a slight smile that conveyed deep satisfaction, the Council has already been implementing many of these principles.
The success of New Zephyr has prompted similar adaptive engineering projects on 17 other worlds facing various crises.
Jamie grinned with the special joy that comes from seeing impossible dreams become practical reality.
That's the thing about good ideas, they spread by themselves once people see them working.
As if to demonstrate his point, communication alerts began chiming from workstations throughout the hub.
Incoming messages from across the galaxy indicated that delegations from dozens of species were requesting permission to visit New Zephyr and study the innovations that had transformed a dying world into a thriving center of technological development.
Representatives from the hive minds want to understand distributed problem solving, Mordan reported. The Silicon Shepherds are interested in your component recycling techniques.
And the Ethereal Assembly is asking about consciousness technology interfaces. Most significantly, Elder Vexani added, 3 different species have reported that they're implementing human-inspired adaptive engineering to address their own existential challenges. The techniques that Jamie taught us are literally saving civilizations. Council Prime Zarthex looked around the bustling coordination hub with its chaotic mixture of species, technologies, and problem-solving approaches. Young Zephyrians worked alongside human researchers, developing solutions to challenges that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Communication channels carried innovations and discoveries between worlds at a pace that would have overwhelmed their old bureaucratic systems but was perfectly manageable using distributed coordination networks. Young Jamie Morrison, he said formally, when you first offered to help our people with your collection of salvaged components, did you envision that your efforts would lead to this? Jamie thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved before breaking into a grin that embodied everything wonderful about human optimism. Actually, I was just trying to help fix the water purifiers. But that's how humans work, we start with small problems and build up to bigger solutions. The important thing isn't the size of the problem you start with, it's whether you keep looking for better ways to solve things.
And now?
Council Prime Zarthex asked. Now we get to find out what's possible when the smartest species in the galaxy stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be awesome instead, Jamie replied with characteristic human confidence. As the crimson sky of Zephyr Prime gave way to the golden light of a newly stabilized atmosphere, another innovation born from the marriage of human adaptability and Zephyrian precision, the assembled group contemplated a future that none of them could have imagined just months earlier. The dying light of a failed world had become the dawn of something unprecedented, a galactic civilization based not on the perfection of individual species, but on the collaborative adaptation of different approaches to impossible problems. And, at the heart of it all was a simple truth that a 12-year-old human boy had taught to an entire alien species: sometimes the best solutions come not from having perfect tools, but from the perfectly human ability to make any tool work well enough to get the job done. The village of Kethmora still existed, but it was no longer just a settlement on a dying planet. It had become the birthplace of a new kind of galactic civilization, one that could turn any crisis into an opportunity for growth, any challenge into a chance for innovation, and any collection of discarded components into the foundation for impossible dreams made real. The transformation was complete, but the adventure was just beginning. And, somewhere in the galaxy, other species facing their own impossible challenges were about to discover that salvation sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources, the boundless creativity of beings who refuse to accept that anything is truly impossible when you approach it with the right combination of determination, ingenuity, and an unshakable belief that there's always another way to solve the problem.